planned a different talk for today, at least based on the title that I chose back in February. What I was going to talk about was something called infinite diversity and infinite combination, sort of a cosmic theme in honor of the new season of Cosmos, which started this month. But I feel the need to take a slightly different direction, because last Sunday, when we closed the service with the prayer for protection, I mentioned that this might be a good time for us to take a look at those words at a deeper level. Can we still derive some sense of inspiration, maybe a little comfort, some strength from those words? It's a good question to ask, because we don't want to turn these things like the prayer for protection into something that is reflexive or superficial, or that we just sort of go through the motions and say it by rote. What does it mean? Because I think we can all use something like the prayer for protection, something that's short and easy to remember, to help us to stay grounded these days, right? Our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, made it very clear right from the start, this was in the late 1800s, that unity was intended to be a resource for people of all different religions, or none at all. It was a movement that was designed to honor the human spirit in all of its manifestations, both intellect, intuition, our seemingly insatiable human curiosity to learn, to discover, to know. Religion would often get in the way of that curiosity, so they wanted to do something different. They truly believed that they could come up with something that would be like a bridge from the traditional ways over here to a new way of looking at the world that was being based on the flood of scientific discovery that was happening at the same time that they were dreaming up this movement. And they also believed that they could still retain the very best parts of those traditional ways and bring them along into this new understanding. So that's an ambitious undertaking. I like to say that they didn't want to pull the rug out from anyone, pull the rug out from under anyone. They wanted to be that bridge to a new way of thinking about the traditional things. In fact, there's a well-known author today. His name is, he's an Episcopal bishop, John Shelby Spong. I think we have a picture of him up here along with a couple of his books with rather provocative titles. Why Christianity Must Change or Die, and Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, along with about a dozen other books. But he once said, when he was giving a talk that I was attending, he said that unity is a bridge from traditional religion to the next step in our spiritual evolution. And here's how he looks at the word God. He says, over the years of human history, every human definition of God has finally died or been radically revised in the light of new knowledge and expanded human experience. So in my mind, there is a reality to God that transcends every definition. People need a bridge. Not everyone is able to leap the chasm that separates traditional religion from this next evolutionary step. And for some folks, it's a giant, scary chasm, almost like a canyon. There can be a combination of guilt, fear, maybe even shame that accompanies the process of letting go of aspects of religion and daring to consider something new. We know that people who go through this process may have family and friends who disapprove. There can be a loss of community. And so we're here to help. It's part of our mission here to help people of all ages and faiths thrive in the midst of change. We give people permission. No, we actively encourage people to reframe the old words and ideas. And we offer some alternatives for that. So today we're going to take a look at the word God in the prayer for protection. What does the word God mean to us when we hear it or use it? You know, some people have, and I know this, some people have a very strong allergic reaction to the word God, which is unfortunate because it can really mean just about anything that we want it to mean. As far as I'm concerned, it's a placeholder, and in some places it works extremely well. It works well provided that we're clear about what it means to us. There's a theologian named Gene Marshall who invites us to ask a very important question whenever we hear the word God. He asks us, he says that we have to ask, what reality are we pointing to when we use the word God? What reality do we point to when we use the word God? God is really a generic name. For many people, over the years, throughout human history, there have been many realities that were being pointed at when they used the word God. For example, here was some examples of reality for people when they used the word God. Odin, Thor, Athena, Freya, and the list can go on and on and on. Everybody had a slightly different idea. We have the gods of the Bible, and yes, I say gods of the Bible because in the Old Testament you find God referred to by a couple of names more commonly, Jehovah or Elohim. And for most Christians, Jesus is what they're pointing to when they use the word God. Definitely not Thor or Odin. If you're Muslim, they use the word Allah, which definitely does not point to Jesus for them because that would be heresy. So even in unity, we find that same idea of using God as a word that points to a certain reality. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned something that Emily Cady wrote all the way back in 1890. Ms. Cady had been asked by the Fillmores to write a series of articles that summarized these early unity ideas, which eventually became the book Lessons in Truth. And this is where she said that God is the name that we give to that unchangeable, inexorable principle at the source of all existence. So for Emily Cady, the word God points to principle. Now that puts us in some really, really good company. Like Albert Einstein, who said, "We followers of Spinoza seek out God in the wonderful order and lawfulness of all that exists and in its soul as it reveals itself in man and animal." That's Spinoza as in Baruch Spinoza, who I consider to be another secular saint, along with St. Albert and St. Emily. When we look at it this way, God is certainly much easier than saying the wonderful order and lawfulness of all that exists and in its soul as it reveals itself in man and animal, right? That's what I mean by a placeholder. That one short little three-letter word can mean all of that if that's what we want it to mean. Principle works as well. It's certainly shorter. It doesn't flow quite as poetically, especially in the prayer for protection. I mean, I've tried to substitute principle for God, and it gets a little bit clunky. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of the prayer for protection because it's a very, it came to be in a very interesting way. It comes to us from another very dark time in human history called World War II. It was 1940, and James Dillett Freeman was asked to prepare a special Christmas prayer service for the workers at Silent Unity, and that is our 24-hour worldwide telephone prayer ministry. Well, at Christmas time in 1940, the United States wasn't in the war yet, but it was raging in Europe and many other places, and everybody kind of knew it was just a matter of time before we got involved as well. So this is how Jim Freeman described the process. He said, "We had never before needed a prayer for protection, but in 1940, we needed one, so I wrote one to go with the Christmas service. And what I wrote was a little 4-line verse. The light of Christ directs me, the love of Christ enfolds me, the power of Christ protects me, the presence of Christ upholds me. That's totally different, isn't it? But that's it. That's the first draft of the prayer for protection. And then after that, Silent Unity asked him to write a pamphlet that they could send to people that contained affirmative prayers for protection. He wrote a pamphlet called His Protecting Spirit, and it included Psalm 23. You know, the one walking through the valley of the shadow of death. By this time, you may have noticed a little bit of a trend though, right? The pamphlet was called His Protecting Spirit, and it had Psalm 23 in it. So there's a definite masculine and Judeo-Christian bias going on there, which is no surprise. In 1940, it was an entirely different culture in this country, and in Unity as well. But fortunately, they had some very good editors at Silent Unity, and someone who was reading a draft of this pamphlet, His Protecting Spirit with Psalm 23 in it, approached Jim Freeman and said, "Jim, if I were a woman in England and they were dropping bombs on my roof, or if I were a soldier and someone was pointing a loaded gun at me, I wouldn't want to feel like I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Can't you do better than that?" And that's when the new version came to him. And this one went like this: "The light of God surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God protects me. The presence of God watches over me." That was all in the second draft. And he explained, Jim Freeman did, that he changed the word Christ to God so that it would be acceptable to more people. And that's the way then that it was finally printed in 1941, just those 4 lines. And then during the second printing, which happened in 1943, he added the 5th line, which we're so familiar with. And that's the line that goes, "Wherever I am, God is." And so thousands of soldiers and civilians carried that around with them during World War II. And it's endured long after. So it's not something that we want to take lightly or disregard without careful consideration. I think it deserves our careful consideration. You know, in more recent times, it was carried by Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11 when he became the second person to walk on the moon. And those of you who are fans of Good Morning America on ABC, you might remember the anchor Robin Roberts. This is a few years back when she told her audience that the prayer for protection was her daily morning prayer. And she explained how it helped her to get through all of the medical procedures that she went through during her long fight with breast cancer. People still use it, and people find comfort and strength in it. So, how's the prayer for protection holding up? How well is it standing the test of time? I think it's doing pretty well. It does seem to describe a God as a being that's out there, but that's just at first glance. It doesn't have to be that way. The light of God, the love of God, the presence of God. Of course, now if that works with your concept of God, that's great. Don't change anything. But for those of us who experience a little dissonance, maybe we can help. You know, once we get clear on what reality we're pointing to with the word God, everything else can fall into place. The reality that I point to is principle, as defined by Emily Cady and Einstein and Spinoza. So, with that in mind, does it make sense to say that the light of God surrounds me? Well, not just yes, but heck yes. And it's something far greater than this visible light spectrum that we human beings refer to as daylight, because, you know, human eyes are not capable of seeing things like X-rays or infrared radiation. If we could see those things, it would never be dark. It would never be dark. We're constantly surrounded by visible and invisible light. It's still physical. And then we can talk about how we use that word light beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. We can talk about how we use that word light in a poetic and metaphorical sense. How does light refer to what goes on within us? How does light refer to the thoughts of our enlightened, creative consciousness? You see, it's not just around us, it's in us. It's in each of us. You know, we have such an amazing abundance of wisdom and creativity and inspiration to draw upon all the time, you know, and not just the people who are alive today, but think about the recorded history of human civilization that's at our fingertips. All of that wisdom, creativity, and inspiration that we have to draw on. We're not just surrounded in light, we are deeply immersed. Does the love of God enfold us? Well, yes, certainly, if by that we mean the compassionate world that we co-create in cooperation with principle and each other. And again, we're also surrounded by the products of human creativity that are given as gifts to humankind, which can also be considered acts of love and compassion. Does the power of God protect us? Yes, certainly, if by that we mean the sustaining nature of the universe that provides us with everything that we need to survive and thrive. It's just another reminder that we are the products of billions of years of a principle-based process that builds and evolves and results in life and consciousness and everything else that we need to live. Does the presence of God watch over us? Well, this one might be a little more challenging because it brings to mind the gray-bearded guy in the sky watching down over us. And if that doesn't work so well for you, maybe a little heresy might help. Meister Eckhart was one of the best-known heretics of the 14th century. And this is something that he said. He said, "The eye with which I see God is the same with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye is one eye and one sight and one knowledge and one love." So we are one with principle, and that's the creative process that propels the universe. We're not so much watched over as we are carried, contained, and known more intimately than we can imagine. And of course, wherever we are, principle is. We just need to let it do its thing. Relax into it and cooperate. Now, some of us may have a little more time on our hands right now than usual, right? Maybe we should take some time to rewrite the prayer for protection for ourselves. And we've given an example that's in the notes for this talk that are posted on our website in the blog section. You know, it's not meant to be a magical incantation. It's more like a short, easy to remember way of relating to the spiritual and physical sides of reality when we don't have time for a treatise or a long formal meditation. So I hope we can find a way to use it as that. I hope that it continues to provide us with a sense of inspiration, comfort, and a sense of being grounded, a sense of familiarity in the face of what is unfamiliar. Next week, time marches on, and it's Palm Sunday, which means we start getting ready for Easter, and together we're going to find out what that's going to look like, because I really don't know yet, but we will let that unfold, and we will try to fix whatever blips and problems we had here today, and we're going to do this again next week. So thank you all for joining us.